The Man Who Came In From the Storm. The storm came without warning. One moment, the village of Whitlow Parish lay cloaked in the soft quiet of evening, smoke curling from thatched roofs, the low hum of the river winding through the valley, and the next, the sky tore open with a fury that made the bells tremble in their steeple. Rain lashed against the stained-glass windows of St. Bartholomew's Church, turning the painted saints into wavering ghosts of colour and shadow. Lightning clawed at the heavens, its brief flashes illuminating the narrow cobblestone paths, and the old oak that stood like a sentinel before the church gates. Inside, Eleanor Whitlow moved through the dim nave with a taper in hand, shielding its fragile flame from the draught that swept beneath the doors. She was not afraid of storms. She had grown up within these stone walls, the daughter of Reverend Thomas Whitlow, a man whose voice could make the very rafters tremble when he preached about sin and salvation. The church was her world, its silence her solace, its rituals her rhythm. But that night, something in the air felt different. The thunder seemed to speak, not only of nature's wrath, but of something waiting just beyond the edge of light. The flame in her taper flickered. Her pulse quickened. She told herself it was the storm. Then came the knock. A single heavy blow upon the wooden doors, another fainter this time, then silence. Eleanor froze. No one would seek refuge at such an hour, in such weather. The parish lay miles from the next town, and even the travellers who passed through during daylight kept to the main road. Her father was away that night, tending to a dying parishioner in the next village. Alone, she hesitated only a moment before setting down her taper and pushing open the doors. The wind roared in like a beast unleashed. Rain struck her face in cold sheets. And there, half collapsed against the threshold, lay a man. He was drenched to the bone, his dark hair plastered against a blooded temple. His clothes, what remained of them, bore the signs of long travel. Torn sleeves, mud-caked boots, a cloak heavy with water. For a heartbeat, Eleanor could only stare. He was tall, broad-shouldered even in his weakness, the kind of man one might mistake for a soldier or an outlaw. Then he groaned. Without thought, she knelt beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" His lips parted, barely forming words. Sanctuary! It was enough. The old law of the church, mercy to those who seek it, ran deeper in her than fear. She slipped an arm beneath his shoulders, straining against his weight, and half dragged him inside. The doors shut with a thundering echo behind them, sealing the storm outside. He slumped against the first pew, breath ragged. By the faint candlelight, she saw the crimson stain spreading across his shirt. "You're hurt," she murmured, reaching for the linen cloth kept near the altar. "Please, don't move!" The man's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His eyes, piercing grey, fever-bright, met hers for the first time. "Don't call the constable," he whispered. Her heart stuttered. "Why would I?" He let go slowly, as though realizing how his words must sound. "I mean no harm. I just need a place to rest, a night's peace, then I'll be gone." Eleanor hesitated. The church was meant to be a refuge, yes, but not for criminals. And yet, as she looked at him, she saw not danger, but desperation. The storm outside howled through the cracks in the doors like the voice of judgment itself. She pressed the cloth to his wound. "Be still," she said quietly. "You'll bleed to death before you make it out of the churchyard." He managed a faint wry smile. "Then perhaps this is fitting." "Fitting? I've always been closer to hell than to heaven." Eleanor frowned, unsure if he spoke in jest or sorrow. "Don't say such things in God's house." He gave a soft, broken laugh. "Forgive me, miss, though I doubt he would." When she removed her hand, the bleeding had slowed. She fetched the kettle from the vestry, warmed water by the hearth, and tore strips from an old linen robe. As she worked, she noticed the faded tattoo on his wrist, a mark of some regiment, or perhaps something darker. "Who are you?" she asked finally. He hesitated before answering. "A man who's lost his way. You may call me Sebastian." She sensed it was not his full name, but pressed no further. "You should rest. The storm won't pass until morning." Sebastian leaned back against the pew, exhaustion carving shadows beneath his eyes. "And you, miss, what's your name, that you risk your father's wrath for a stranger?" "Eleanor Whitlow," she replied softly, "daughter of the parish priest." At that, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps even shame. A priest's daughter! God truly has a sense of irony. "I think he has mercy," she said simply. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain softened to a steady hiss against the windows, and the thunder rolled away into the hills. Eleanor sat across from him, her taper burning low. She watched his chest rise and fall, his rough features softened by sleep, and wondered what kind of man would come to a church. Half dead, fleeing shadows, begging sanctuary. Outside, the wind carried the faint toll of midnight. Inside, in the flicker of a single candle, two souls, one bound by faith, the other by sin, shared the same fragile light. And though neither knew it then, this night would be the beginning of everything, the night when mercy met temptation, and heaven's daughter opened her door to hell's own son. The scent of incense and sin. Morning broke gently over Whitlow parish, pale and cold after the storm's violence. Mist clung to the graves outside the church. Like the breath of ghosts, and dew glittered on the iron gate. From the belfry came the soft coo of doves returning to their perches, as if even nature exhaled in relief that the tempest had passed. Inside the chapel, the air was heavy with the mingled scents of wax-damp wood and incense, and beneath them, faintly, the sharp tang of iron, blood. Eleanor Whitlow moved quietly through the pews, her hands trembling slightly as she carried a basin of fresh water. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw again the stranger's face, half lit by the taper's glow, the haunted eyes, the scar along his jaw, the way his voice had cracked when he said, "I've always been closer to hell than heaven." She paused near the altar and looked toward the back pew, where he still lay. Sebastian Vale had not moved much since she'd bandaged him. His breathing was steadier now, though his clothes remained soaked and tattered. The first light through the stained glass painted his face in broken colours, ruby, sapphire, gold, like a sinner caught beneath heaven's fractured gaze. Eleanor set down the basin, knelt beside him, and spoke softly. "You should drink something." He stirred, groaning faintly as his eyes opened. "Am I still alive?" "You are," she replied, "though you'd have died had you stayed outside another hour." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Then I owe my life to a priest's daughter. There's irony in that." "You should not mock what saved you." "I don't mock," he said, wincing as he tried to sit up. "I'm simply not used to mercy." She helped him lean against the pew. Up close, he smelled faintly of rain, iron, and earth, the scent of the world beyond the parish, wild and dangerous. There was something untamed about him, like a wolf forced to rest among lambs. Eleanor looked at him cautiously. "You said you were not a criminal." "I said I meant no harm," Sebastian corrected, those are not always the same thing." She frowned. "Then what are you running from?" He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "Some debts cannot be repaid, Miss Whitlow. Some ghosts cannot be buried." Eleanor wanted to press him, but something in his tone silenced her. She rose, wringing out a cloth. "I'll fetch food from the rectory. My father returns at midday. You must be gone before then." That made him look up. "Your father wouldn't approve of a wounded man seeking shelter." "My father," she said quietly, "believes mercy must always serve righteousness. He would see your wounds as proof of punishment." Sebastian's expression darkened. "And what do you see?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, fingers tightening on the basin's rim. "I see someone who needed help, nothing more." He smiled faintly. "You're a poor liar, Miss Whitlow. Your eyes, they look at me as if trying to read the story behind every scar." Eleanor flushed and turned away. "You should rest." She left him then, retreating to the vestry to gather bread and broth. But as she moved through the familiar stone corridors, her thoughts churned like the river after rain. She had always been obedient, gentle, devout, the perfect daughter to a man who prized holiness above all else. Yet in one night, she had harbored a stranger her father would call a sinner. And worse, she had felt something she could not name, a kind of pull. When she returned, Sebastian was standing, unsteady but upright, gazing at the stained glass window that depicted St. Michael defeating the serpent. The coloured light cast his figure in sharp relief, a soldier fallen from grace. "You should not stand," she said quickly. "Your wound will reopen." He glanced back, eyes half-shadowed. "I've faced worse. Pride is not strength. Neither is fear." Their eyes met. Something wordless passed between them. Not defiance, not quite curiosity, but the faint recognition of two souls who had both lived under judgment. Sebastian's gaze softened. "You said your father's name was Reverend Whitlow." "Yes." "I've heard of him," he murmured, "a man of fierce sermons. Once rode 3 miles in a snowstorm to condemn a tavern." "That's true," Eleanor admitted with a reluctant smile. "He said no soul should drown in ale when it can drown in prayer." Sebastian chuckled low. "And you, do you believe as he does?" "I try to," she said, "but faith is not a mirror of our fathers. It is a struggle of our own." The sincerity in her voice seemed to catch him off guard. He studied her for a long time, as though trying to understand how purity could wear such quiet strength. Then, suddenly, the bell above the church door rang. Eleanor startled. "My father!" "No," Sebastian said sharply. "He wouldn't arrive without warning." They both turned toward the entrance. The heavy door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Mrs. Godfrey, the baker's wife, her shawl dripping rain. "Miss Eleanor!" she called, spotting her near the altar. "I came to see if the church fared well after the storm. Reverend Whitlow isn't back yet." Eleanor forced a calm smile. "Not yet. He should return this afternoon." Mrs. Godfrey's eyes darted towards Sebastian, who now stood half in shadow near the pews. "Oh, and who's this?" Eleanor's heart leapt. "A traveller. He sought shelter during the storm. He'll be leaving soon." The woman's gaze narrowed slightly. "Strange sort to travel alone through Whitlow Moor. There've been stories, you know. Highwaymen near the old bridge." Sebastian inclined his head politely. "Then I'm fortunate to have found refuge here, madam." Mrs. Godfrey sniffed. "Well, the Reverend won't like strangers sleeping near his pulpit. Mark my words." She left soon after, but her disapproving glance lingered like a curse in the air. When the door finally closed, Eleanor turned to Sebastian with a sigh. You see, even a moment's mercy becomes gossip before noon. Sebastian's lips curved slightly. Then perhaps I should go before your kindness costs you your place in heaven. You cannot go yet, she said firmly. You're still weak. He looked at her, truly looked, and something unreadable flickered in his gaze. You risk too much for me, Eleanor. Hearing her name and his voice made her heart stutter. I would do the same for anyone. No, he said softly, you wouldn't. The silence between them grew charged, almost unbearable. Outside, the bells tolled the hour. The scent of incense from morning prayers still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint metallic trace of his blood. And in that heady mixture of holiness and danger, something within Eleanor began to awaken. For the first time in her life, she wondered what it meant to feel alive. That night, when her father returned and the church bells went silent, Eleanor found herself standing by the window of her small room, watching the moonlight fall upon the chapel below. Inside, in the darkened nave, Sebastian Vale slept, a sinner beneath her father's cross. And though she told herself it was pity that made her watch over him, the truth pressed deeper, warmer, more forbidden. For even through stone walls and whispered prayers, she could still feel his presence, like the echo of a storm that refused to pass. The confession that should never be heard. The rain had ended, but its memory lingered in every drop glistening on the church windows. A pale dawn crept over Whitlow parish, soft as a prayer left unfinished. Eleanor had risen before the sun, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared the chapel for morning service. Her father's voice echoed faintly from the rectory beyond, firm and familiar, reading scripture to himself, as he always did before preaching. To him, the world was divided neatly into light and shadow, sin and salvation. To Eleanor, those lines had begun to blur. Sebastian Vale still slept in the back pew. She had meant to wake him before her father returned, but some part of her, the part she barely dared to name, could not bear to send him back into the wilderness just yet. He looked younger in sleep, less dangerous. The hard planes of his face softened, the tension eased from his jaw. His hair fell across his forehead, and the faint rise and fall of his chest seemed almost peaceful. Only the faint scar along his collarbone betrayed the life he had lived, a life of battles, secrets, or perhaps regrets. Eleanor found herself watching him longer than she should have. The flicker of a candle played along his features, and she realized how long it had been since she had looked at someone not as a soul to be saved, but as a man. And that thought alone frightened her more than any storm. "Eleanor!" came her father's voice suddenly from her doorway. She startled, nearly dropping the silver chalice she was polishing. "Father, you're awake early." "I am the Lord's servant," Reverend Whitlow said, stepping into the nave. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the morning light. There is much to atone for after a storm like that. Nature reminds us of his wrath, does it not? Eleanor nodded faintly, keeping her back turned so he would not see her pale face. "It does, Father." His eyes scanned the church and lingered on the back pew. For a terrible moment, Eleanor thought he saw the figure lying there, but the angle and the shadows spared her. Sebastian had shifted beneath his cloak, hidden from sight. Satisfied, the Reverend moved toward the altar. "I shall prepare the sermon. Fetch the book of Psalms from the vestry." "Yes, Father." She curtsied and fled down the narrow passageway, her heart pounding like a drum. By the time she returned, the pew was empty. Her breath caught. Sebastian was gone. But then, A whisper of motion from behind the pulpit drew her eye. He stood there, hidden from her father's view, one hand pressed to his bandaged side, the other steadying himself on the carved wood. Eleanor's relief was almost dizzying. She mouthed, "Stay still." He nodded once. For the next hour, she moved like a ghost, balancing two worlds, the holy rhythm of the service her father delivered and the secret heartbeat of the man hidden behind the altar. When the Reverend's booming sermon echoed through the church, "Even mercy, without repentance, is but the devil in disguise," Sebastian's eyes met hers across the dim light. Neither spoke, yet something in that shared glance burned deeper than words. When the service ended, the villagers filed out slowly, murmuring their prayers and gossip in equal measure. Mrs. Godfrey's sharp gaze swept the pews again, but she saw nothing out of place. At last, the heavy door closed, and silence returned. Eleanor rushed to the pulpit. "You shouldn't have stayed," she whispered. "If my father had seen you." Sebastian leaned wearily against the wall. "I tried to leave, but the world outside isn't quite ready to forgive me." "You speak as though forgiveness were a thing you could bargain for." "Perhaps it isn't," he said quietly. "But some part of me still wants to believe in it. That's why I came here." She looked at him, puzzled. "You came here deliberately?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "No man runs toward a priest's house unless he's desperate, or damned." He sank into the nearest pew, wincing as the movement tugged at his wound. His eyes, that stormy grey, met hers. "You deserve to know, Eleanor, what kind of man you saved. You owe me no confession, but I owe myself one." He drew a breath, as though bracing against something unseen. 3 years ago, I was a soldier, not one of honour, a conscript sent to fight in Shum, a war that wasn't mine. When it ended, I came home to find everything gone. My land, my family, my name. I took to the roads, and the roads took what little decency I had left. His voice roughened. I robbed, I fought, I killed. Once, I even struck down a man who wore the cloth, though he was no better than the devils he preached against. Eleanor flinched. A priest? He sold the poor to pay the rich. I saw his ledgers. But what I did, it doesn't matter. The law marked me for it. I fled, and I've been running ever since. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's throat tightened. Every word of her upbringing screamed at her to recoil, to call him monster, blasphemer, murderer. Yet all she could see before her was a man hollowed out by guilt. "You should go to the authorities," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "If you speak the truth, perhaps there will be mercy." He looked up sharply. "And if there isn't?" She faltered. "Then pray." He gave a dry, aching smile. "I've forgotten how. Then I'll pray for you." Something in her tone made him still. For a moment, the weary mask slipped, and she saw the boy he must once have been standing before some long-forgotten altar, before life taught him what it meant to lose faith. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Why do you care, Eleanor? You don't even know me." "Because no one is beyond redemption," she said softly. "Not even you." He laughed, not mockingly, but like a man on the edge of breaking. "You sound like your father." "I hope not." Her honesty startled him. Their eyes met again, and this time the silence between them was electric, charged, dangerous. "Eleanor," he said at last, her name a whisper, a warning. "You shouldn't be near me." "Then why do you look at me like that?" she asked before she could stop herself. He froze. Outside, the church bell tolled once, a sound that seemed to shatter the moment. Sebastian rose abruptly, his jaw tight. "I'll leave tonight. You've done enough. Where will you go? Wherever the law hasn't found me yet." She wanted to protest, to beg him to stay, but words failed her. Only the faint scent of incense hung between them, a perfume of sanctity and sin. Before he left, he turned back to her. "If I don't make it past the moor, you'll know why the rain never frightened me. It was the only thing that ever washed me clean." And then he was gone. That night, Eleanor lay awake, the storm's memory whispering through her window panes. Her father prayed in the next room, his voice steady and certain. But Eleanor's prayers faltered. She could still hear Sebastian's voice, low and broken, confessing not only his crimes but his soul. And though she told herself she pitied him, only pitied him, her heart knew the truth. It wasn't pity she felt. It was something that no prayer could absolve. Thus she mooned over Whitlow. Parish days passed, though to Eleanor they felt more like suspended breaths between prayers. The storm had gone, the roads had dried, and yet the memory of that night, of Sebastian Vale's confession, and the way his voice had trembled on her name, lingered like a bruise on her heart. She told herself he had gone for good, that he was miles away by now, far from the parish and its whispers. And yet, every time the wind passed through the churchyard at dusk, she turned her head, half expecting to see his shadow among the graves. Her father noticed her distraction. "You are pale, child," Reverend Whitlow said one evening as they took supper in the rectory. "You spend too much time in contemplation." "I was merely thinking of the storm, father," she replied quietly, "and the souls it may have claimed." He looked at her sharply. "Storms claim only what is weakly rooted, Eleanor. The righteous are never swept away." She lowered her gaze. "Yes, father." But inside, she wasn't certain she believed him anymore. That night, sleep would not come. The moon hung full and white above the parish, its light spilling across her room like spilled milk over dark wood. She lay restless, listening to the distant cry of an owl, the creak of the old timbers, and something else. A sound, soft, deliberate, a knock, 3 times against the pane of her window. Eleanor's breath caught. She sat up, the nightgown clinging to her as she crossed to the window and drew aside the curtain. Sebastian Vale stood in the moonlight below, half in shadow, his cloak drawn close against the chill. His face was turned up toward her, pale in the silver glow, eyes burning like distant embers. "Sebastian," she whispered, pressing a hand to the glass, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should I have been alive," he murmured, his voice just loud enough to reach her. "But both things seem to have happened nonetheless." Her heart twisted. "If my father—" "I'll be gone before dawn," he said, "but there are words left unsaid between us, and I can't carry them any further." She hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping on her cloak. The church door's latch made a faint click, and the night air embraced her as she stepped outside. The graveyard was bathed in pale light. The stones glimmered faintly with dew. The yews whispered secrets older than the parish itself. Eleanor moved carefully between the graves until she stood before him. "You shouldn't have come back," she said again, though her voice lacked conviction. "I tried to go," Sebastian said softly. "Truly. I reached the edge of the moor, but something pulled me back." "Foolishness? Perhaps," he said with a faint smile. "Or something far worse." She folded her arms, though more to hide her trembling hands than to scold him. "If my father finds you here—" "He won't," Sebastian said. "He sleeps deeply, after prayer. But I won't stay long. I only needed to see you once more." Her throat tightened. "Why?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because I've been running from judgment all my life." And when you looked at me that night, you didn't see a criminal. You saw me. That's more mercy than I've ever known." Eleanor felt her heart ache at the rawness in his voice. "You shouldn't mistake compassion for what?" he interrupted gently. "For love?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence between them was thick and trembling. Sebastian stepped closer. The moonlight brushed his cheek, and she could see the faint scars like threads of shadow across his skin. "You are your father's daughter," he said quietly, "but I think your soul belongs to no man, not even to him." "Please," she whispered, though she did not step away. "If you speak such words, I cannot answer them." "Then don't," he said. "Just listen." He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of her cloak, tentative, reverent. The touch sent a shiver through her. No man had ever touched her like that, as though afraid she might vanish if he breathed too hard. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, "but if there is any light left in me, Eleanor, it's because of you." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because I cannot bear it." She turned away, but he caught her wrist, gently, as one might hold a bird. "Eleanor." Her name in his voice undid her. She turned back, her breath trembling, and before she could think, before she could pray, he kissed her. It was not the kiss of a thief or a sinner, but of a man starved of grace, desperate, trembling, reverent. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The church bell did not toll, the wind did not stir. Only the heartbeat between them, wild and uncertain, filled the night. When he drew back, she stood motionless, her lips parted, her chest rising and falling. "That was wrong," she breathed. "I know." "Then why?" "Because right and wrong mean nothing when I look at you." Her tears fell freely now. "You must go." He nodded, stepping back, though his gaze never left hers. "I will. But remember this, I never meant to steal anything from you, least of all your soul." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows beyond the graveyard, leaving her alone beneath the cold, merciless moon. Eleanor stood there long after he was gone. The wind stirred her hair, and the yews whispered above her, like witnesses to her fall. She touched her lips, still tingling with the memory of him, and whispered a prayer she knew heaven would never answer. "Forgive me." But somewhere deep within her, another voice, softer, sadder, whispered back, "He already has." From that night onward, the moon over Whitlow Parish was no longer a symbol of purity to her. Became a mirror, cold and unblinking, reflecting the secret she now carried in her heart, that the priest's daughter had tasted sin, and found it sweeter than salvation. The devil in the pulpit, the morning after that forbidden kiss, dawned colder than any before. The parish bells tolled softly through the mist, each note heavy as guilt. In the grey light of dawn, Eleanor knelt before her window, her hands clasped tightly, her lips moving in a prayer she could not finish. Her soul felt divided, one part still kneeling in her father's church, the other lost somewhere among the gravestones beneath the moon. She had sinned, and yet she could not repent. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the warmth of Sebastian's hand, the tremor in his breath, the desperate honesty of that kiss. It haunted her more than fear, more than shame, because it had not felt evil. It had felt true. By mid-morning, the world had changed. Rumours began to stir in the village like embers caught on the wind. Mrs. Godfrey's sharp tongue found new prey. The stranger returned, seen near the moor, perhaps sheltering again at the church. By noon those whispers reached Reverend Thomas Whitlow. He found Eleanor in the chapel, arranging flowers at the altar. His shadow fell long and dark across the aisle. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "is there something you wish to confess?" Her fingers stilled. "Confess, Father." He stepped closer. The look in his eyes, that mix of sorrow and suspicion, chilled her blood. "Word has come from the village. They say a man has been seen near the church, the same one you tended to during the storm." Her breath caught. "He was wounded. He needed help. And you gave it," her father said sharply. "You let him sleep beneath the Lord's roof. I said nothing then, but now he returns." She turned toward him, heart pounding. "He's done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong." The Reverend's voice rose like thunder. "You speak for him as if you know his soul." "I do not," but she faltered. Her silence betrayed her. Reverend Whitlow's face hardened. "Dear God," he whispered, "it's true then. You've brought shame upon this house, upon his house." Tears filled her eyes. "Father, please, I never meant—" "You have given your heart to sin," he said, his voice trembling with fury and heartbreak. "I have seen men destroyed by temptation, but never thought to see my own daughter." He broke off, turning away, one hand pressed to his brow. The silence between them stretched like a blade. At last he spoke again, quieter but colder. "He will come again. I can see it in your face. When he does, I shall be ready. Father, go to your room, Eleanor. Pray, perhaps God may yet forgive you." That night, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The wind whispered through the trees outside, and the church loomed in the moonlight like a pale sentinel. Eleanor could not sleep. She stood by her window again, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon of the moor. A single candle burned beside her, its light trembling as though afraid of what it might soon reveal. Then a shadow moved beyond the churchyard wall. Sebastian. She knew his gait, even in the dark. Without thought, she threw on her cloak and slipped quietly into the corridor. But when she reached the chapel door, another figure was already there. Her father, still and silent, standing by the altar, holding a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. "Father, no," she whispered. He turned, eyes blazing. "Stay where you are." Outside, the latch lifted. The door creaked open, and Sebastian stepped into the nave. He froze at the sight before him. The priest in his robes, the lantern light throwing monstrous shadows across the pews, and Eleanor pale and trembling by the wall. "Reverend Whitlow," Sebastian said slowly, "I didn't come to defile your house. I came to finish what you started." The priest's voice shook. "You think I don't know what you are? A murderer, a thief, a corrupter of the innocent." "I never meant to harm her," Sebastian said. "If there is blame, it's mine alone." "Blame?" The Reverend's voice cracked. "You speak of blame as if it were dust to be brushed away. You stand in the house of God, confessing sin, and yet you make excuses." Eleanor stepped forward. "Father, please." "Silence," he roared. "Do you know what you've done, child? You've welcomed the devil into my pulpit." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "Call me what you will. I've been called worse by better men." The priest raised the pistol. The lantern light glinted off the barrel. Eleanor cried out, "No, he's unarmed!" But before her father could speak again, a crash shattered the silence. The back door of the church burst open. 2 men stormed in, cloaked, muddy, carrying torches. Their accents were rough, their faces harder still. "Sebastian Vale," one growled. "We've been hunting you 3 counties over. The price on your head's high enough to feed a village. The bounty hunters." Sebastian's expression darkened. "So the past found me after all?" Reverend Whitlow turned. confused, the pistol wavering between them. "Who are these men?" "Justice," one sneered. "The kind your sermons can't deliver." Before anyone could move, one of them lunged forward. Sebastian reacted by instinct, seizing the man's arm, twisting hard, the pistol firing into the rafters with a thunderous crack. Eleanor screamed. Smoke filled the air, mingled with the acrid scent of powder and wax. The lantern fell, flames licking across the floorboards. "Father!" she cried. "The fire!" But he was already rushing forward, trying to stamp out the blaze. Sebastian fought the second intruder, the clash of bodies echoing through the nave. Hidayu struck hard, fast, desperate, a man who had known too many fights, too many sins. When it was over, the two bounty men lay unconscious, their torches extinguished. Smoke drifted upward, curling towards the cross. Eleanor stood frozen, staring at Sebastian through the haze. "You saved him," she whispered. Sebastian turned and saw the Reverend fallen to his knees, gasping. The smoke had thickened. His breath came shallow and broken. Eleanor ran to her father's side. "Father, please!" He looked up at her, not in anger now, but in sorrow. His voice was faint. "He has taken my faith from me." "No," Sebastian said hoarsely, kneeling beside him. "I never wanted this." The Reverend's gaze flickered between them, the sinner and his daughter, kneeling together at the foot of the altar. His lips trembled, as if trying to form a prayer, but none came. Then his head bowed, and his hand slipped from Eleanor's grasp. "Father!" The bell above the church began to toll. Once, twice, then endlessly, as the flames rose higher and the night filled with its hollow cry. When the fire was finally subdued, the church stood blackened and broken. The bounty hunters fled into the dark, and the villagers came too late to save the Reverend's life. Eleanor knelt among the ashes, her face streaked with soot and tears. Beside her, Sebastian stood silent, hollow-eyed, his soul burning in ways no flame could match. "He was a good man," Eleanor whispered. "He only wanted to save me." Sebastian's voice broke. "And I damned him instead." She reached for his hand, trembling. "No, you tried to save us both." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw true fear in his eyes, not of death nor punishment, but of what he had become. "I can't stay," he said. "They'll come again, for me, and now for you. Then I'll go with you." He shook his head. "You can't. I've destroyed enough." Eleanor rose, defiant even through her tears. "You've given me truth. That's all I ever wanted." He hesitated, torn between guilt and the fierce, fragile love burning between them. Then he cupped her face gently, his hand trembling. "Forgive me." And before she could answer, he turned and vanished into the night once more. When dawn came, the villagers found Eleanor still kneeling in the ruins of the church, her white gown dusted with ash. They whispered of tragedy, of sin, of divine punishment, but none dared to touch her. She raised her eyes to the shattered altar and whispered a final prayer, not to heaven, but to the man who had fled into the wilderness. "May God forgive us both," she said. Outside, the sun broke through the smoke, gilding the ruins in pale gold, as though even heaven itself could not decide whether to mourn or bless what had been lost. Blood on the altar. The wind howled through the hollow church ruins like a spirit that refused to leave. By the chute, next evening, the ashes of Whitlow Parish had cooled, though smoke still lingered faintly in the air. The last sigh of something sacred undone. Eleanor had not slept. Her eyes were hollow, her voice faint, her white hands smudged with soot that would not wash away. Her father lay in the rectory, shrouded in linen, awaiting burial. The villagers came in small whispering groups to lay flowers, but none dared look Eleanor in the eye. They said the priest's daughter had consorted with the devil, that her sin had burned the Lord's house to the ground. She bore their silence like a penance. Beyond the moor, in the hollow of a ruined mill, Sebastian Vale waited. He had not eaten since the night of the fire. The pistol burn across his hand throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache inside his chest. He had thought he knew what guilt felt like. But this hollow, wordless agony was something far crueler. When he closed his eyes, he saw the church engulfed in flame, Eleanor crying out, and the Reverend's face in the smoke, not angry, not vengeful, only disappointed. The image broke him. By dawn, he made a decision. He would not run again. If redemption existed, if there was even a single fragment of light left in his life, it was bound to her, to the girl whose mercy had undone him and whose love had damned him. That night, a thin frost silvered the churchyard. The stars burned coldly above, silent witnesses to human frailty. Eleanor stood beside her father's grave, her cloak drawn close. Her hands trembled as she lit a candle and placed it on the stone. "Rest now," she whispered. "Your fight is over. Mine has only begun." A voice behind her said softly, "You should not be alone." She turned sharply, and there he was. Sebastian looked more ghost than man. His once dark coat was torn, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Yet when he looked at her, she felt warmth rise where only grief had lived. "You shouldn't have come back," she breathed. "I had to." He stepped closer. "To see you, to make it right." "There's no making it right," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't undo death." "No," he said quietly, "but I can stop another." Something in his tone made her heart falter. "What do you mean?" "Men are coming," Sebastian said. "The bounty hunters from the fire. They followed my trail. They know I came here again." Eleanor's breath caught. "Then you must flee." He shook his head. "Not this time. Sebastian." He took her hands in his. "Everywhere I go, I bring ruin. But if I leave now, they'll come for you, for your father's memory, for this village." His voice softened. "No more running, no more shadows." "Then let me help you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. That same crooked smile that had undone her the night he'd arrived in the storm. "You already did." Moments later, they heard the sound of hooves and boots on the frozen earth. Torches appeared between the yews, their light dancing across the gravestones. "Spread out!" a voice barked. "He's here somewhere!" Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me," he said. "No!" He turned to her, eyes fierce and gentle all at once. "If they take me, say nothing. If I fall, don't cry for me." "Don't say that," she whispered, clutching his arm. But he was already moving toward the church. The inside of the ruin still smelled faintly of smoke and ash. The charred cross hung crooked above the altar. Moonlight fell through the shattered roof, pale and holy. Sebastian stood at the foot of the altar waiting. The first of the men burst through the doorway, the same bounty hunter whose arm he had broken before. His face was twisted with fury, half lit by the torch he carried. "Well, well," the man sneered, "the sinner returns to his chapel." Sebastian said nothing. His shadow stretched long across the floor. "You cost me a lot that night," the man continued, drawing his pistol. "Your bounty dropped since the priest died. You're worth more dead now than alive." Eleanor's voice echoed from behind a pew, trembling. "You're trespassing on holy ground." The man laughed. "Then God can watch what happens next." He raised the pistol, but Sebastian moved first. A struggle followed, fierce but desperate. The torch fell, scattering sparks. Eleanor cried out, the sound slicing through the cold night. The gun went off. Smoke filled the air. The echo rang through the ruin like a bell. When it cleared, Sebastian stood over the man, breath heaving, pistol fallen from his own trembling hand. The bounty hunter lay still. Eleanor stumbled forward. "Sebastian, what have you done?" He looked at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. "He left me no choice. Her voice broke. "You've killed again." "I know," he whispered, "and now there's no forgiveness left." The sound of approaching riders echoed from beyond the walls. More men, more guns, more sin. Eleanor grasped his face between her hands, her eyes fierce with grief. "Then run, please." He shook his head. "If I run, they'll burn this place again. I'll not see your father's grave desecrated." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Then let me stay with you." He smiled sadly. "You already are, in every breath I'll ever take." The riders drew closer. Sebastian turned toward the door, shoulders squared. "Go, Eleanor. I won't. Go." For a heartbeat they stood there, two souls suspended between salvation and ruin. Then, in one last act of mercy, he caught her face and kissed her. Hard, desperate, final. When he broke away, his eyes were calm. "Tell them the truth," he said softly. "Tell them the sinner came to confess." Then he stepped forward into the moonlight as the riders burst through the gate. Eleanor screamed his name, but her voice was lost in the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire. When the noise died, the world was still again. Smoke curled lazily through the rafters. A single candle, her candle, still burned before the altar, flickering weakly against the dark. She found him there, lying beneath it, his hand outstretched toward the cross, his eyes half open, as if still watching the light. Eleanor knelt beside him, pressing his hand to her lips. "You kept your word," she whispered. "You saved us." His fingers were still warm, and on his lips, faint but unmistakable, was a smile. Outside, the bounty men were gone. The night wind swept through the church, scattering ash and candle smoke, whispering through the empty pews like a prayer left unfinished. Eleanor rose, her face streaked with tears, and walked to the altar. Blood had stained the stone. She touched it gently and whispered, "May this be the last sin you ever bear." Then she lit the last candle and set it beside his body. Its flame wavered, then steadied, a fragile, defiant light against the darkness. From that night on, they said the ruined church of Whitlow Parish was haunted, that on stormy nights a candle burned by the altar, and the faint sound of a man's voice could be heard, whispering a woman's name. But Eleanor knew better. It was not a haunting, it was a promise. The sin and the salvation. The dawn came slow over Whitlow Parish, pale gold spilling across frost and ruin, soft as forgiveness. The church stood silent now, its windows dark, its once proud bell tower charred and broken. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly, carried on the cold wind that wound through the graves. Eleanor Whitlow stood alone before the altar, or what remained of it, with her hands folded over her heart. She wore no veil, no cloak, no symbol of her old life. Only a simple white dress, now grey with ash. Around her, the morning light filtered through the shattered roof, touching her face like a benediction. Sebastian Vale lay buried beneath the willow tree behind the church, the same place her father used to read his psalms in summer. No stone marked the grave, only the rough wooden cross she had carved herself, its letters uneven, her tears blurring the words as she wrote, "Here lies a man who sinned for love, and found salvation in it." The villagers had begged her to leave. They said she was cursed, that no woman who loved a killer could ever find peace. But Eleanor remained. She rebuilt the church with her own hands, stone by stone, beam by beam, with help from no one but the quiet sky above, and the faith she still carried, not the faith her father had preached, full of judgment and fear, but the quiet faith Sebastian had taught her with his final act. That love, even broken, even forbidden, could be holy too. Weeks turned into months. The first spring came timidly over the Schissel moor, the snow retreating from the graves, crocuses pushing through the earth. Life crept back to the parish, cautious but unyielding. And still each night, Eleanor would light a single candle by the altar, for her father, for Sebastian, for herself. It was said that sometimes when the wind blew just right, the flame would bend toward the willow tree outside, as if drawn by a breath unseen. One evening, as the sky deepened to violet, Eleanor sat by the river that ran behind the rectory, her reflection trembling on the water's surface. She had brought with her Sebastian's old compass, the one he'd carried since boyhood, now rusted and dented. She turned it over in her hand. The needle still quivered north, steady and faithful, even when the world did not. Her father had once told her that sin was a compass pointing away from God. But she had learned that love was not the opposite of faith. It was the proof of it. She whispered into the dusk, "If you can hear me, know that I've forgiven you." The river murmured in reply, carrying her words out to where the horizon met the light. That night she dreamed. The church was whole again, golden with candlelight. The air was warm, the pews filled with faceless souls humming a hymn she did not know. At the altar stood her father, not stern or weary, but smiling, gentle as she remembered him before the years hardened his faith. And beside him stood Sebastian, dressed not in the tattered clothes of a fugitive, but in white. His scars were gone. His eyes, those dark, storm-swept eyes, were calm. He held out his hand. "You kept your promise," he said. "I rebuilt what we broke," she whispered. He smiled. "No, Eleanor. You rebuilt what we were." Her father placed a hand upon her shoulder. "The Lord does not count the sins of those who love selflessly, my child," he said. "You were never lost, only searching." A light spread across the church, blinding and pure. When it faded, she stood alone before the altar once more, the candlelight flickering like stars. Eleanor woke with tears on her cheeks, but her heart was still. Outside, the first birds of morning sang. For the first time in months, she did not weep when she rose. She simply lit her candle, placed it at the altar, and whispered, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgave each other." Years passed. The story of Whitlow Parish faded into legend. Some said the priest's daughter had gone mad after the fire. Others claimed she became a saint, that her prayers healed those who entered the church in sorrow. No one knew the truth. But every dawn, as sunlight poured through the rebuilt windows, a single candle would already be burning, its flame steady, unyielding, and faintly warm, even on the coldest days. Some swore that on certain mornings, when the mist hung low and the bell chimed once for the living and once for the dead, they could see two figures walking among the graves, a woman in white and a man in a dark coat, hand in hand. Not ghosts, not sinners, just two souls finally at peace. Eleanor's last words, written in her journal years later, were found beneath that same willow tree where Sebastian rested. The ink had faded, but the message remained. He was the sinner they warned me of, but I was the one who lost faith first. In the end, love was our confession, and God our witness. And so it was said that on the moors of Whitlow, when storms gather and the church bell tolls, the candle in the window burns still, a light for lost souls, a prayer for lovers, and a reminder that sometimes salvation wears the face of sin.